we ask, could you please not open it up until we finish our discussion? They open it right
Paul
up.
Allison, Teddy Roosevelt, his daughter's
You're live.
had to be the bride in every wedding.
So-
But really,
Yes, like really.
good morning. Today
Morning.
is Wednesday, January 11th, 2023. This is the meeting of Senate Natural Resources and Energy. We are sitting down with our legislative counsel, Mr. Chakowski, to talk about Vermont state energy policy with a subset of them with a focus on thermal, and because we're taking up the Affordable Heat Act for the next 6 to 8 weeks. So with that, good morning, everyone, and let's get started. Mr. Chakowski, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. Today posted on your website is the slide deck I'm going to go through, and Jude has it posted, but I'm going to review a handful of statutes with you. Senator Bright asked me to give you an overview of the state energy policy, which was an interesting task for me to sort of draw a boundary around, because I think most of Title 30 contains many statutes that could be defined as the state energy policy. So figuring out which to include in this presentation was a little bit challenging. So that's why it's an emphasis on ones related to thermal as well as greenhouse gas reductions. So I stuck with the sort of umbrella policy that I think will help frame some of the discussions you will have as you move forward working on bills. So the first slide is 30 VSA 202A. This is the state energy policy. It is the general policy of the state of Vermont to ensure to the greatest extent practicable that Vermont can meet its energy service needs in a manner that is adequate, reliable, secure, and sustainable. That ensures affordability and encourages the state's economic vitality, the efficient use of energy resources, and cost-effective demand-side management, and that is environmentally sound. So I think this first one really reflects the overall themes of the rest of this presentation, which is there is a balancing of a number of competing issues when it comes to energy service, and that balance is related to reliability, security, affordability, as well as efficiency and environmentally sound. So all of those things are balanced, and you'll see those things reoccur in a few of these other statutes. But to continue, number 2, to identify and evaluate on an ongoing basis resources that will meet Vermont's energy service needs in accordance with the principles of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and least cost integrated planning, including efficiency, conservation, and load management alternatives, wise use of renewable resources, and environmentally sound energy policy. So again, very similar concepts. But again, focus on emissions reductions and efficiency. To meet Vermont's energy service needs in a manner that will achieve the greenhouse gas emission reduction requirement pursuant to 10 VSA 578, which is the language from the Global Warming Solutions Act that set the mandatory greenhouse gas reductions and is consistent with the Vermont Climate Action Plan adopted under 592. So that is the really big umbrella energy policy in Title 30. And the rest of these statutes, I think, sort of flow from it and or relate to it. But the next one, slide number 3, technically.
Can I ask a quick
Sure.
question?
Yeah.
So sub 3 on that first slide, consistent with the Vermont Climate Action Plan adopted and updated. So even though that's a plan that originates outside of legislature, it still has, I don't know if we should call it legally binding in terms of state policy. That's the right way to think of it. And I ask that because sometimes people wonder, well, what's the status of that from our climate council that writes the climate action plan? Are they advising us, or are they creating a legally binding? We legally binding recommendations?
No. So first, this is a policy goal statute, so in and itself is not binding. But specifically here, it is saying it is the goal to meet the energy service needs in a way, in a manner that will achieve greenhouse gas reductions and is consistent with the climate action plan. So it's hard for me to say that that's a legal requirement, other than your action should not be in direct conflict with the plan. The plan itself isn't binding in that way.
Okay, so it's, anyway, it's a guardrail for our work, not necessarily explicitly identifying our action. Got it, thank you.
Okay. Next is 10 VSA 578. So this is what I just mentioned. This is the greenhouse gas reduction requirement statute. As we move through our work this session, if you hear me refer to the Global Warming Solutions Act or the GWSA, often I'm referring to this statute, which establishes the mandatory greenhouse gas reductions that need to be met. So,
When we say needs to be met, is it binding?
yes, they are requirements. So Vermont shall reduce greenhouse gas emissions from within the geographical boundaries of the state and those emissions outside the boundaries of the state that are caused by the use of energy in Vermont, as measured in inventory in section 582 of this title. And here are the dates, not less than 26% from the 2005 greenhouse gas emissions by January 1, 2025, pursuant to the state's membership in the U.S. Climate Alliance and the commitment to implement policies to achieve the objectives of the 2016 Paris Agreement. Not less than 40% from the 1990 greenhouse gas emissions by January 1, 2030. Not less than 80% from the 1990 greenhouse gas emissions by January 1, 2050. So these are requirements. The first sentence has a shall in it, and it's 26% by 2025, which is less than 2 years from now, 40% by 2030, and 80% by 2050. And the reason that we know that these are mandatory and legally binding is that in addition to this language, there was other language in the Global Warming Solutions Act that prescribes the ability for citizen lawsuits to sue if these goals are not met. So technically, if no one sues under them, nothing might happen, but people have the ability to sue if these requirements are not met by these states.
That's a good question.
Sure.
Actually, do you want us to like raise our hands? Or do you want us to-
Sometimes, generally, yes. Or people give me a look, or they flip a finger, or just whatever. I try to, but if I'm looking down, I might.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay.
fly me down.
So under subsection 1, when it says pursuant to the state's membership in the United States Climate Alliance, and then commitment to implement policies to achieve blah, blah, blah. Can you just explain that a little bit? Like, are we permanently a member? Could we become not a member and then that part of it goes away? How does that work?
I cannot, I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't write the Global Warming Solutions Act, but yes, the US formally left the Paris Agreement. I don't know what the status of that is. I don't know.
Okay, no, that's all right. I just was wondering. Thank you.
All right, so I think these first two were sort of the biggest ones for you to consider. 202A is actually referenced in multiple other statutes, so I think that it is considered one of the big umbrella policies for state energy work. But then 578 modifies that by having this mandatory requirement. And so having that in mind as you pass legislation, I think would be important for you.
Mr. Chairman,
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
To your question. Just a little bit of history. Our membership in the Climate Alliance was quite a big deal, and it was bipartisan. The governor supported it. And so I think us pulling out is certainly possible, but I don't think very much.
Okay.
And it would require that somebody started as an initiative, would be pretty complicated. Would you agree, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I was actually looking back at climate governor's climate action committee from 2017. I think in the resolution calling for the creation of, there's a reference to having joined the Climate Alliance there. So I think it was just an action of the governor to say we're in.
Okay.
That was in response to Trump pulling out of the Paris.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
And these goals that got a more, the biggest change with GWSA was, it used to say if practicable. So there was always a,
Yeah.
they were more aspirational than binding. Once upon a time.
Okay, so the next slide is 30 VSA 202. I went back and forth about including this here, but I do think it is another important statute. So this is for electrical energy planning. So the Department of Public Service, through the Director for Regulated Utility Planning, shall constitute the responsible utility planning agency for the state for the purpose of obtaining for all consumers in the state proper utility service at minimum cost under efficient and economical management consistent with the other public policy of the state. The director shall be responsible for the provisions of plans for meeting emerging trends relating to electric energy demand, supply, safety, and conservation. And then B starts with the department through the director shall prepare the electrical energy plan for the state. This section in general was really long, so I just thought I'd pull out a couple of things that seemed relevant to this sort of theme. So there's an electrical energy plan prepared by DPS. In developing the plan, the department shall take into account the protection of public health and safety, preservation of environmental quality, the relevant goals of 24 VSA 4302, which are the goals of the municipal and regional planning statutes. And that section in itself is like 6 pages long. So there are many goals in that statute, including related to energy efficiency. The potential for reduction of rates paid by all retail electricity customers, the potential for reduction of electrical demand through conservation, including alternative utility rate structures, use of load management technologies, efficiency of electrical usage, utilization of waste heat from generation, and utility assistance to consumers in energy conservation. And then I skipped a few sections. I went down to subsection I just because I thought this was interesting. It shall be the goal of the electrical energy plan to assure by 2028 that at least 60 megawatts of power are generated from within the state by combined heat and power facilities powered by renewable fuels as defined in 8002. In order to meet this goal, the plan shall include incentives for the development and strategies to identify locations in the state that would be suitable for combined heat and power. The plan shall include strategies to assure the consideration of combined heat and power potential during any process related to the expansion of natural gas services in the state. So that's a goal I hadn't heard of recently. So that's just something I found in reviewing the statute that there are a couple other sections where there's sort of mini goals within the statutes.
Do you happen to know that and we'll have the department in, so we can, and the director of regulated utility planning, one of our guests. Do you happen to know where we are on that?
No.
There's that sub-I goal.
Nope. I hadn't heard of it before, but I haven't been working on energy policy that long, so it doesn't mean anything.
Title 30 is not a straightforward chapter.
Yes.
So when we do the SMEEP program or Rygate, the language that we pass is prefaced with notwithstanding what you've just read to us.
I don't think it is specifically. I do think there's notwithstanding language in the SMEP statute.
Can you say what this?
Oh, sure. SMEP is the Self-Managed Energy Efficiency Program that allows the largest energy users in the state to self-manage their energy efficiency, as opposed to how other energy users manage efficiency. The answer is I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know.
What?
I don't know off the top of my head.
So how about writing?
I don't know.
So we're discussing what the law says you have to do, but we're not discussing how we may or may not routinely not do it.
We can be discussing it. I wasn't prepared to discuss it.
And Senator McDonald, Mr. Poor will be in at 10:30 along with the department, so he might be a good person to check in with Brigate and how we're doing in this whole period.
And I think you've made your point, Mark.
Bray, and I don't know if you want to ask that to Senator Bray. I mean, I think he asked me to put this presentation together so that you were aware for this session moving forward what some of these things were.
Yeah, I also, and I think this is correct, so that the electrical energy plan that's developed gets rolled into the comprehensive energy plan. I think it becomes a part of that, but I'm not positive. I think that's, the comprehensive energy plan is broader than the electrical energy plan, and I think it rolls into it, so we're not duplicating things that are.
I'm not certain, but maybe.
Well, the department's following us. Sarah, what?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my understanding is that they still have to collect, so they hold on to the efficiency charge revenue and develop their own programs within this. So it's still managed by Efficiency Vermont or by the department, correct? Like they still have regulatory requirements in the same way.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's different. It is a different system, but yes, it is overseen by the Department of Efficiency Vermont.
So the department is given the authority to exercise it notwithstanding.
Well, that's the interesting question, I think. I don't know. I thought they had to meet the same requirements, even though they were separate from.
Well, I would argue they don't have to meet the same requirements and they're free to ignore the requirements.
Well, so,
But that's.
I don't know.
We'll out later.
Yeah, I don't know what the performance requirements are in terms of what they are, I think that's one of the things that gets discussed is what measures that they take, do they qualify as electrical energy? So they get to do some process fuels and modifying manufacturing processes, stuff the rest of us don't. Thank you. Any other things on 202? Question?
All right, so the next one is 30 VSA 218E. So I included this because it came up recently. So 218E is a slightly unusual statute here. So implementing state energy policy manufacturing. To give effect to the policies of section 202A, which is the one I read first, to provide reliable and affordable energy and assure the state's economic vitality, it is critical to retain and recruit manufacturing and other businesses, and to consider the impact on manufacturing and other businesses when issuing orders, adopting rules, and making other decisions affecting the cost and reliability of electricity and other fuels. Implementation of the state's energy policy should encourage recruitment and retention of employers providing high-quality jobs and related economic investment and support the state's economic welfare, and appropriately balance the objectives of this section with the other policy goals and criteria established in this title.
Does that mean you could ignore the previous statute? You're free to ignore it if that's what's required to encourage recruitment and retention.
Well, you should appropriately balance it, and if this weighs heavy, it might outweigh the other considerations.
Sarah?
The word should is not super clear to me, like, if it's a shall, I'm like, all right, you gotta do it, find it, right? If it's, like may,
You're
sure,
allowed.
you're allowed to not. Should, is that into the category of like,
It's in between
is it
may
a-
and shall.
right, is it aspirational, or is it like, no, you gotta do that?
No, so I didn't draft this. This is, I think this is from 2013. And so it's a sort of another goal statute, so it isn't as binding as shall
Okay,
and isn't a may. You're right, it is unusual in drafting.
yeah, okay.
It's not mine.
It's not binding.
Okay.
Well, the statute is binding, those last two the subsections underneath it should, it's a should, so that's a little weaker proposition. But the statute was recently cited in a decision, so it has been used. I think it was the first time it had been used, so it was recently used. So it is part of the energy realm.
And the recent decision relates to global foundries becoming so.
Yes.
I think it's my recollection, so maybe others will remember, or I think, so this is a Shumlin administration amendment statute that was in support of making more explicit a policy that helps them, I believe, support global foundries at the time. I would say no governor wants to see them leave the state on their watch. So we go through cycles of the state responding to requests for more latitude or more support. And I think this was one of those.
Not how you can follow statute.
Or rewriting statute so that they're following statute. But it's 2013, right?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Anything more on this one?
No. All right, so the next slide is 30 VSA, section 255. So this is the statute that establishes the state's participation in RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Regional coordination to reduce greenhouse gases. So I'm not going to read all of it. I'm just going to read the last three because I do think it relates to the overall concept today. So number 6. The General Assembly finds it is crucial to manage Vermont's implementation of RGGI and its consumption of fossil fuels for residential and commercial heating and industrial processes so as to maximize the state's contribution to lowering carbon emissions while minimizing impacts on electric system reliability and unnecessary costs to Vermont energy consumers, and minimizing the costs and the emissions resulting from the use of petroleum-based fuels for space heating and process heating for residential, commercial, and industrial purposes. The accelerated deployment of low-cost process, thermal, and electrical energy efficiency, the strategic use of low and zero carbon generation, and the selective use of switching fuel sources are the best means to achieve these goals. It is critical that funds made available from operation of regional carbon credit cap and trade system be devoted to the benefit of Vermont's energy consumers through investments in a strategic portfolio of energy efficiency, weatherization, and low carbon generation resources. This is also a fairly old statute. I think this is from 2008, but very similar themes to what we've discussed already, but also what you will be working on, I think, this session.
It was also interesting that Governor George Pataki, Republican in New York, was, I think, sort of the driver of RGGI, and Governor Douglas, also Republican, was the one who signed Vermont on, helped, move Vermont into it. So it's the other thing I sometimes think is when people worry about a carbon tax being crippling or in some way. RGGI is in a and certainly you can call it a carbon tax, it's for emissions for generating stations, electrical generating stations greater than 25 megawatts. And it's a cap and trade, they have to make purchases so that that cost gets rolled into the price of electricity. It's a subtle enough cost rolled into that price, and we've been paying it since I think 2010. And almost no one in the state is aware of it, and I've never heard a complaint about the impact of breaking down electrical energy prices. So to me, it's a model of when something's done well and subtly, you can manage the cost and then gain improvements. I forget how much what the proceeds are each year to Vermont, but they're in the plus dollars a year, something like that. People can learn more about Reggie them up. Thanks.
Okay, so the next few statutes I've included are about the renewable energy standard. So 30 VSA 8001 establishes the renewable energy goals. So we're in a different part of Title 30 right now, but they all sort of work together. This is the chapter that establishes the RES and the other renewable energy programs. So the General Assembly finds it is in the interest of the people of the state to promote the state energy policy established in Section 202A by balancing the benefits, lifetime costs, and rates of the state's overall energy portfolio to ensure that to the greatest extent possible, the economic benefits of renewable energy in the state flow to the Vermont economy in general and to the rate-paying citizens of the state in particular. So a balancing, again, is sort of a recurring theme here. Supporting development of renewable energy that uses natural resources efficiently and related planned energy industries in Vermont and the jobs and economic benefits associated with such development, while retaining and supporting existing renewable energy infrastructure. Providing incentive for the state's retail electricity providers to enter into affordable, long-term, sustainably priced renewable energy contracts that mitigate market price fluctuation for Vermonters. Developing variable markets for renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. Protecting and promoting air and water quality in the state and region through the displacement of those fuels, including fossil fuels, which are known to emit or discharge pollutants. Contributing to reductions in global climate change and anticipating the impacts on the state's economy that might be caused by federal regulation designed to attain those reductions. Providing support and incentive to local renewable energy plants of small and moderate size in a manner that is distributed across the state's electric grid, including locating such plants in areas that will provide benefit to the operation and management of that grid through such means as reducing line losses and addressing transmission and distribution constraints. Promoting the inclusion of Vermont's electric supply portfolio in Vermont's electric supply portfolio of renewable energy plants that are diverse in plant capacity and type of renewable energy technology. So that is the framing for the next statute, 8004, and then 8005, which established the renewable energy standard.
One editorial.
Sure.
So 7, we're not talking about the RES right now, but it's interesting to see the overall frame for that chapter, and 7 and 8 seem particularly sort of on point for discussions when we do get to the RES, which at this point the House is leading on, so we may see a bill for them, I'm sure when.
Okay, so 30 VSA 8004 establishes the RES. The renewable energy standard is established. Under this program, a retail electricity provider shall not sell or otherwise provide or offer to sell or provide electricity in the state of Vermont without ownership of sufficient energy produced by renewable energy plants or sufficient tradable renewable energy credits from plants whose energy is capable of delivery in New England that reflect the required amounts of renewable energy set forth in section 8005 of this title, or without support of energy transformation projects in accordance with this section. That's like the longest sentence I've read in the statute, and it's not great, but I think you are all familiar with the concept of renewable energy is required. We either need to generate that renewable energy yourself as this is for utilities. They need to generate it themselves, they need to purchase, or they need to purchase RECs or some combination thereof to cover their required amounts. A retail electricity provider may meet the required amounts of the renewable energy through eligible tradable renewable energy credits that it owns and retires, eligible renewable energy resources with environmental attributes still attached, or a combination of those credits and resources. So the next section is 30 VSA 8005, which sets out the RES tiers. And I just thought I'd go over them very quickly since this is another significant part of the energy policy of the state. And I'm just going to do them quickly and not do like this very specific details of each, but there are 3 tiers under the renewable energy standard. The first, tier 1, is total renewable energy. So to encourage the economic and environmental benefits of renewable energy, this subdivision establishes for the RES minimum total amounts of renewable energy within the supply portfolio of each retail electricity provider. To satisfy this requirement, a provider may use renewable energy with environmental attributes attached, or any class of tradable renewable energy credits generated by a renewable energy plant whose energy is capable of delivery in New England. And so the required amounts, 55% of each utility's annual retail sales starting in January 1, 2017, increasing by an additional 4% each 3rd January until reaching 75% on January 1, 2032. So tier 2 is distributed renewable energy. This subdivision establishes a distributed renewable energy generation category. Renewable generation category for the RES. This category encourages the use of distributed generation to support the reliability of the state's electric system, to reduce line losses, contribute to avoiding or deferring improvements to that system necessitated by transmission or distribution constraints, and diversify the size and type of resources connected to that system. This category requires the use of renewable energy for these purposes to reduce environmental and health impacts from air emissions that would result from using other forms of generation. And so the required amounts, 1% of each utility's annual retail electric sales beginning January 1 of 2017, increasing by an additional 0.3% each year until reaching 10% on or after January 1, 2032.
So I think for the math curious, I think that for tier 1, I think that puts us, since it's every 3rd year, I believe it's, I think we're at 63% for tier 1. Positive, but I want to double check. Sometimes I don't know if they're counting, how they count, which year they count, the one you're coming into or the one you're leaving, whatever. And I think when I looked at the EAN 2020 report, tier 2 was at 2.8% up to 10%. So maybe a little higher now.
Okay. So then tier 3 is energy transformation. This subdivision establishes an energy transformation category. This category encourages Vermont retail electricity providers to support additional distributed renewable generation or to support other projects to reduce fossil fuel consumed by their customers and the emission of greenhouse gases attributable to that consumption. A retail electricity provider may satisfy the energy transformation requirement through distributed renewable generation in addition to the generation used under tier 2, or energy transformation projects, or a combination of such generation and projects. So for the required amounts shall be 2% of each utility's annual sales starting in January 2017, increasing by an additional 2/3% each year until reaching 12% in January 2032. Okay. So moving on from the RES, the next slide is 10 BSA 581. So this comes out of the air pollution chapter in Title 10. So this is technically an air pollution related goal, but I do think it directly relates to your work. So 581 is building efficiency goals. It shall be goals of the state to improve substantially the energy fitness of at least 120,000 housing units and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 0.15 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2031. So I'm going to go through the rest of this, but the rest of the statute is fairly old, but subsection 1 was amended by this committee 2 years ago to increase the number to 120,000 housing units. I think it previously was 80,000. So this is a recent increase that your committee looked at.
So currently we have, how many reaches? Is it 80?
I don't know what the current number is, but the prior version of the statute said 80,000 housing units.
I think we're at roughly 30,000 units.
So our goal used to be 80, now it's 120, and we're at 30.
We're at,
And I think it's gone up. I mean, that was, when we were talking about this, we were at 30. And, you know, the rough discussion was doubling the rate and then doubling the rate again. So we have a accelerating curve for doing this work. We're doing 2,000 units a year, we're hoping to be at 4.
you have your numbers spot on, Chair Bright. We went from 29,238 in 2019 to 31,338. And it's a very helpful page if folks want to follow along with our goals and the EAN. They have it broken out by statute and CAP as well.
They do? Maybe I should get a copy of that.
It's a lot in
I
there.
was trying to remember where it was.
All right, so number 2, so to reduce annual fuel needs and fuel bills by an average of 25% in the housing units served. To reduce total fossil fuel consumption across all buildings by an additional 0.5% each year, leading to a total reduction of 6% annually by 2017 and 10% annually by 2025.
How did we do in 2017? Yeah.
I don't know.
That one I don't know.
This was, what number is it?
That was 3.
They don't have it.
And then there's been an ongoing discussion, like pretty much every year, about the building codes for new buildings, and also like we have a code, then we have a stretch code, and we keep pushing along. And then there's questions about to what degree do we enforce that code? And I think Montpelier wrestled with this whole thing of efficiency, right?
Yes.
Did you end up mandating efficiency levels for new construction?
No, I mean, we, not anything beyond, what's otherwise, adopted around the state. We did pass a charter amendment that would have allowed us to, regulate energy efficiency in existing buildings. But that part of our charter amendment did not pass the legislature.
And do you have, does Montpelier, but I think actually, as best I know, our efficiency goals for housing are actually quite good. I mean, that's my understanding, but the concern is they're not necessarily enforced as much. Is Montpelier equipped to enforce that code?
In that we have staff, perhaps we're better equipped than other municipalities that don't have staff to do that, but I don't think that there is necessarily a lot of, I should say I don't know.
Okay.
That's about the extent of my knowledge.
And I think Representative Campbell's gonna be bringing something forward again to address building energy efficiency. The other thing we've struggled with in here, just while we're talking about use, is something equivalent to a miles per gallon sticker for homes, like a home energy rating. Because frustratingly, my personal experience and from hearing what other people say, the real estate market doesn't necessarily value energy efficiency in a home. So you may do it because you believe in it, but if you sell your home, you may not recover the full value of that investment. Part is just that there's no standard for disclosure about energy efficiency. Someday we get back around to that. Sarah?
Thank you, Chair Bright. I'm struggling to find the numbers in here, but I think it is under the first section of thermal that tells us our goal, and it's in thermal BTUs, which I think is, I don't know what that translates to in real numbers.
Sarah?
There is infrastructure for serving, for heating businesses and homes in Montpelier, particularly in the downtown, but it seems to be, people don't connect to it.
Oh, you mean the district heat
Yeah.
plant?
What you attribute, the,
People not connecting? The connection costs are very high, so it's a steep hurdle to overcome there. So last study, we were exploring some grants to help reduce those connection costs.
the more you pay, they get it more attractive.
Well, with increased fuel prices, it's certainly looking better. Yeah, but we haven't had, to my knowledge, I don't think we've had any recent connectors in the last few years.
But were those connections to be made, it would, the goals that have been set forth would be measures of achievement of having switched to.
Well, especially as folks, would have gotten off of, if it was a switch off of fossil fuels, which I'm sure most of them downtown would be. So this is a question, are we counting wood chip heat as clean, as not greenhouse gas emitting?
That's a good question. I mean, how clean wood is, I think it's a topic of ongoing discussion.
Fair enough. That's like a whole can of worms.
Right.
Maybe we shouldn't go there right now.
But that's, we are, when we deliberate, we buy and sell the cans of worms.
Yeah.
That's our,
Yeah.
that's our currency.
But we are gonna be hearing from people who are of the opinion that we should not be counting water and other biofuels as clean.
Well, and it comes up in heat bill.
What is clean?
Biomass.
To allow the utilities to use it towards their goals.
Currently, for instance, McNeil, 53 megawatts that's treated as clean fuel. And it's actually part of how, it's also, it's either base load or close to base load power for them. And I think it's actually a pretty significant part of Burlington Electric's way of not only meeting their targets, but selling credits related to that generation to help their, I think there's, well, I I'm gonna stop there, otherwise we'll be driving by headlights.
It's always been a controversial
Mhm.
proposition. And it's one that we sort of just look the other way from to get the overall.
So just going back to a previous point of yours, so we, in Montpelier did pass an energy labeling requirement for buildings. And so I just want to reiterate that. You mentioned like, hopefully we could bring that back up at some point. And so we'll actually have some data from Montpelier to inform how that's going. If we do get to bring it up again, maybe that next session.
Sarah McDonald was asking about Montpelier's experience with district heat.
Yeah.
Is there capacity in that system that's untapped at the moment? Like, could you serve more people?
So my understanding is that that is a point of discussion, because the city felt that there was capacity that the city could expand it to, but last I knew that, you know, folks from the state thought that there was not capacity. But that was sort of available to the city to expand. Now that, to be totally fair, that discussion may have been resolved since the last I heard, but that's an ongoing, well, at least as far as I know, that's an ongoing discussion. Yeah.
Anything more on this one, this page?
I didn't finish reading this page,
Okay.
but
Thank you.
I didn't want to interrupt your discussion. We can keep talking too. So number 4 is to save Vermont families and businesses a total of $1.5 billion on their fuel bills over the lifetime of the improvements and measures installed between 2008 and 2017. To increase weatherization services to low-income Vermonters by expanding the number of units weatherized or the scope of services provided, or both, as revenues become available in the Home Weatherization Assistance Fund.
Do you want to know what year this was added? Is it like,
I don't know off the top of my head. I can get it. I can pull Title 30 off the shelf if you want to know, or Title 10 off the shelf, because it has to have been probably before 2008.
okay. Well, we can check in on that later.
Yeah. Our trend is negative on it. It's one of the goals we're not meeting.
That we're reducing but not meeting the goal, or we're actually increasing?
We're increasing and not meeting the goal.
Increasing and not meeting the goal. Does that mean our emissions are rising in that
Yes,
sector?
yes.
Okay. Thank you.
It was 2008. I found it.
Seems like I remember this from the era of speaker silent.
All right, so the final slide is 580. So this is also in the air pollution chapter of Title 10. So this is a 25 by 25 state goal. It is the goal of the state by the year 2025 to produce 25% of the energy consumed within the state through the use of renewable energy sources, particularly from Vermont's farms and forests. And then the sections underneath it refer to some reporting and public outreach that the agencies are supposed to do on this goal. I found the word forests there to be odd. I think that probably refers to biomass, but generated from forests felt odd, but that's just an aside.
By the process of elimination.
I mean, I really don't want to like cut down the forest to put up a new plant. I don't think that's what it's saying. Anyways, sorry. So yes, I hadn't really been familiar with this goal before, so I found it interesting.
I think this is the same era, Douglas era goal. And I think it was in part motivated by people in the rural part of the state, especially on the ag side, to think about generating more electricity. Well, is this all under electricity, 580? We're
So
talking about energy more broadly.
actually 580 is air pollution.
Oh, air pollution. resolution.
But you are, yes, this was also enacted in 2008.
So I don't know where, Senator White, you've been following these along. Does 25 by 25 appear in that chart?
It would be under electrical. I'm not seeing it.
Could be just more generic, not
Yeah.
necessarily.
I don't think they call it out in this. But it might take me a moment to find, because it's not an obvious one in the electric center section, the electricity center.
I mean, I think,
It'd be interesting to know where we are on that.
I agree.
Okay. Mr. Duval from EAS is gonna be in a week. He knows that report, I think it's set out backwards, so maybe ahead of time we can send it back question. We're at 580.
all right, so that was my last slide. Obviously, there are many other statutes in Title 30 that I didn't include. I did not talk about least cost planning at all, because that is really like an electrical utility planning statute. So there are other statutes that govern or that have laid out your policy for electricity in the state. I didn't go through all of them.
Well, and now, through miracle of reading, I'm noticing that there's a report, it's supposed to come back every 3 years.
Right, it's part of the comprehensive energy plan, the report for 2020, for 25 by 25.
So starting 2009, and every 3 years thereafter, we should be able to get something from the Agency of Agriculture. Would you be willing to inquire of the Agency of Agriculture? Or actually, I can ask Jim to do that. Well, I'll run it down. I'm just wondering if we can chase that down. So Jim, can you do that?
I didn't hear what you said.
There is a report listed in here. In this section. It's supposed to be from Secretary of Agriculture. If you could ask for the most recent report on NVSA 580, that'd be great. Thank you. Anything else? Any questions for Ms. Chakowski on this energy policy background? Thank you. Because we have time, the other thing that's coming up is tomorrow, we're gonna have the Agency of Natural Resources in, basically for the entire morning. So it's in 3 chunks. Chunk 1 is introduction, so we meet Secretary, Deputy Secretary, 3 commissioners, get the lay of the land, what they do. They're the department we work the most with, agency we work the most with. And we'll hear after 10:30 from the other department we work the most with, from our public services coming in at 10:30. But the part of, and the 3 chunks are, 1 is introduction, 2 is what are the states, what are the plans of the administration in order to address these climate requirements in transportation, in thermal, and in agriculture. So our top 3 sources of emissions. And then the 3rd hour is oriented to last year, H715, the Clean Heat Standard was vetoed. The point of the conversation is we're working on the very same topic. So in terms of proceeding in good faith, I really would like to understand fully that veto message. I'm not sure I do. And it came in after we didn't really have a discussion on it at the time. So this is a chance to review it now, up to speed on it, and ask some questions of Secretary Moore. And it's my hope that either the administration has a plan of their own to offer to meet these requirements, or they have suggestions that we might consider as we work on. But since the climate emission reduction, it's a requirement in law. So since we're lawmakers, I think we're also be law followers, and all of us who swear an oath of office. So I figure we need to figure out what that strategy is, falls to us. So I'm hoping that we get help from the administration where we review the plan they bring forward. So tomorrow will be a chance to start on understanding where they are. We're back last spring, maybe since then there's been further conversation, so we'll know where they are currently. These we can move on if we're looking at. To that end, in terms of being prepared for that conversation, I asked Mr. Capsey to review the detail letter. And so we'll shift to that now so we can go through it and sort of come up to speed for being prepared for tomorrow. June, do you have that? Can you put that up on the screen?
It's the letter you sent you right before committee, the H715 letter. So I think so. June will post it on your website in a moment, but just to review again, last session, this committee as well as the House worked on H715, an act relating to the clean heat standard. The House worked on it first, sent it to this committee. This committee did a lot of work on it. Then it went to Senate Appropriations and further work was done on it. It passed, was sent back to the House, they accepted it, and it was sent to the governor on May 5th, and he vetoed it on May 6th. So when the governor vetoes a bill, the governor does usually send a letter explaining the reasoning. The governor doesn't necessarily need to have strong reasons to veto a bill. The legislature did then have an opportunity to override the veto, and the House was unable to override the veto. So, but the letter does contain some explanation as to why he vetoed the bill. And so I will read it to you.
It's up on the screen. Thank you.
Great. So pursuant to Chapter 2, Section 11 of the Vermont Constitution, I am returning H715, an act relating to the Clean Heat Standard, without my signature because of my objections described herein. As governor and as elected officials, we have an obligation to ensure Vermonters know the financial costs and impacts of this policy on their lives and the state's economy. Signing this bill would go against this obligation because the costs and impacts are unknown. Senator Bray, do you want me to read it through, or do you want me to stop after each assertion?
All the way through, and then we'll go second pass.
Okay.
Just cost and impacts of current policy also on that?
Yeah, so let's go all the way through, and then we'll come back to reconstructing the letter.
Okay. The legislature's own joint fiscal office acknowledges this fact, saying, "It is too soon to estimate the impact on Vermont's economy, households, and businesses. The way in which the Clean Heat Standard is implemented, including the way in which clean heat credits are priced and how incentives or subsidies are offered to households and businesses, must be established before meaningful analysis is possible. At the same time, those incentives or subsidies could be costly for the state, suggesting larger fiscal impacts in the future. I understand the importance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is why I proposed $216 million climate package, and why my administration has engaged in this policy conversation since January. However, over the last several months, it became very clear to me that no one had a good handle on what this program was going to look like, with some even describing it as a carbon tax on the floor. I have clearly, repeatedly, and respectfully asked the legislature to include language that would require the policy and costs to come back to the General Assembly in bill form so that it could be transparently debated with all the details before any potential burden is imposed. This is how lawmaking and governing is supposed to work, and what Vermonters expect, deserve, and have a right to receive. What the legislature has passed is a bill that includes some policy with absolutely no details on the costs and impacts, and a lot of authority and policy making delegated to the Public Utility Commission, an unelected board. And regardless of the latest talking points, the bill does not guarantee a full legislative deliberation on the policy, plan, and fiscal implications prior to implementation. By design, this bill and the inadequate checkback allow legislators to sign off on a policy concept absent important details and do not own the decisions to raise costs on Vermonters. For these reasons, I can allow the bill to go into law and strongly urge the legislature to sustain this veto.
So let's go back up to the top and look more closely. So you offered to offer some comments, and I'm sure we'll have questions, but why don't you start with what you were going to point out to us, and then I'm sure other people may have other thoughts.
Okay, well, I could say we could go line by line. I mean, I think the first thing I want to say is that H 715 was not a carbon tax. It was not a carbon tax. There was no tax in the bill. There are a couple of other assertions in here that I think you could disagree with. I think I do disagree with some of the characterization. I mean, line by line, we have an obligation to ensure Vermonters know the financial costs and impacts of this policy on their lives and the state's economy. Signing this bill would go against this obligation because the costs and impacts are unknown. He then quotes joint fiscal from their fiscal memo on the bill at one of the stages. I haven't looked back to see which memo he quoted this from.
I think it's
The fiscal note, yeah.
yeah. Okay, it's undated, so they're actually prepared, kind of almost identical, a little confusing, but yeah, it is part of the fiscal. Oh, here we go. Sorry, they are dated. Is my mistake. The most recent one, so probably the one we're looking at is dated April 7th, 2022. We can get a copy of that from the committee, and I think we can post it as well. Did you hear that?
Yeah, but I'm copying it to scan it, to put it up.
Okay.
So just to clarify, these are the fiscal notes that went along with this bill. Were there multiple? There were just these two, or were there more?
I think that there were just two, and I'm guessing they did one in March, and those are just, I'm guessing had more information, so it came back and revisited it in April. But
I knew close to both.
yeah, I think the quote though may come. I don't actually see what is quoted in the governor's remarks, the veto message.
She may have done that when she came to committee, Joyce, or
Oh, and
Julia.
speaking, that may be on the maybe oral testimony.
It could be. I remember that sort of when we had the minute, I couldn't.
So let's track that down, because it'd be nice to know what the context was and when it was, when the bill was sort of done. Is that what was said, or is it earlier in the process? Well, so the biggest question that raises for me is the notion to which the full financial costs and impacts have to be known before we act. And Senator McDonald's point, do we know the full cost and impacts of the current system? I'm not sure how well quantified they are already. But so my question, I don't know if you can help, it's not necessarily precisely a legal question, but it seems to me like we engage in rulemaking regularly, and as part of that rulemaking, we figure out the costs and financial implications as part of the rulemaking. And I don't know, I know that the Administrative Procedures Act is not your bailiwick, but have you looked into it enough to know whether or not, if I'm remembering right, that the Administrative Procedures Act calls for environmental and economic impact analysis?
Yes, that is part of the documentation that needs to be submitted to LCAR when a final rule is proposed.
Okay. And we were talking about how many rules a year we do. It's something on the order of 40 rules a year. 20 to 40 varies. I'm just not aware of ever being told before that we need to have a full financial costs and impacts related to a policy determined before we engage in the rulemaking. It seems somewhat unusual. I don't know if you're aware of any other situation in which we were asked to have that thorough analysis prior to engaging in the rulemaking, which itself is designed to articulate the costs and financial impacts.
I don't know much about calculation of financial impacts. I know that JFO is consulted on some, but not all bills that have fiscal impacts. I don't know to the extent that they do a fiscal impact on every bill, but they do for many bills do a fiscal analysis. And honestly, I have not really read that many fiscal notes, so I don't know to the extent how detailed or what the things are they normally include.
Okay, so we've I reached out to half of them and Joyce Manchester and JFO to help us get started on this, and we'll ask them to help us continue to do the work. So Senator McDowell and Senator McCormick, you've both been in this building a long time. Have you experienced a pushback on a bill because the rulemaking itself was insufficient to determine the financial impacts of the bill?
People don't like something, they make a financial argument. If they like it, they make a financial argument for the same bill. And their arguments are different.
We routinely get fiscal notes from Joint Fiscal. It is not as though we pass legislation without knowing the fiscal implications. And that we had a fiscal note. I said, yes, the fiscal note did say that it's too soon to know exactly. But that's more or less boilerplate. With apologies to Senator White, who was my running mate during the last year, he's heard me say this like a broken record. But I've got to say, no plan is a plan. If you've got a situation and you don't have a plan, your plan is for the situation to continue as it is. And I would challenge the governor to explain to us how he intends to pay for his plan. And I think these folks are getting away with murder rhetorically when they characterize and not just this, various environmental initiatives as fiscally irresponsible. Because the fact is we're paying through the nose right now for global warming.
Which, or have a fiscal. No.
Yeah. Well, there are people who have developed such things out of the shop. Yeah.
We know how much it'll cost us.
Well, and isn't social cost of carbon an attempt to put a figure, a price on sort of the status quo of the moment?
We have a Melissa Bailey coming up. Are there two Melissa Baileys around, or is this the same one that
She
you
has
represent the
changed.
communities?
She has changed jobs. She was here in this community from DIPSA before.
Julia Leopold is our new FIPSA person. Julia Leopold is our new FIPSA person.
So, but back to, so, okay, so there's that, I'd like to go back to the letter and just make our way through the rest of it. Can,
Yeah.
sorry,
I put that for everybody.
The next sort of line is why, which is why I proposed $216 million climate package and why my administration has engaged this policy since January. However, it's become clear to me that no one had a good handle on what this program was going to look like, with some even describing it.
I have no idea what that reference is to. Well, it was gratifying that programs developed in the legislature, like Weatherization for All, received the support of the administration and the proposed budget. I'm glad the legislature, which passes budgets, actually made that allocation. Great, all right, so can we keep going through the letter? Anything on that? Okay, read on.
So I clearly and repeatedly and respectfully asked the legislature to include language that would require the policy and costs to come back to the General Assembly in bill form so that it could be transparently debated with all the details before any burden is imposed.
So that strikes me as an unusual request. I don't know that I've ever experienced.
I've never forgiven it, I apologize, Santa Barbara.
No, that
I apologize.
And I'm not aware of ever being instructed by the executive branch as to how legislative procedure should move forward, but I know that I asked Ms. Chakowski this very question, like, is that an accurate impression or not? And I pointed out that there are ways in which the governor influences legislative procedure or policy.
Sure, so I would just say that under the Constitution, there are 3 separate branches of government, and the individual branches cannot usurp the power assigned to one of those branches. The legislative branch has the supreme lawmaking authority. The executive branch executes that policy that is adopted by the legislature. So the governor does not have a direct role in that sense because he is part of the executive branch. However, legislation that is passed, therefore adopted policy, required is sent to the governor for signature. And so if the governor does not sign a bill, it will not become law unless his veto is overridden by the legislature. So while he is not directly a part of the lawmaking process in the most constitutionally basic sense, he does have leverage in that he can decide whether or not to withhold his signature, at which point the legislature would need enough votes to override the veto. So
Well, if he withholds his signature, it passes equal after 5 days, right?
well, sorry, not signing a bill can either be, he has to make an affirmative statement that he's letting it become law without his signature, because automatically, if he doesn't sign it, it's a veto unless he says otherwise.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. I thought it was, if you
I
don't
mean-
say a thing, it was, well, terminology.
When I taught government, what I would always say to students was you were told in high school that the legislature passes the law and the administration administers it. So the legislature tells the administration what to do. But it's more complicated than that. The administration tells the legislature what it is they think we should tell them. And it's tested to me, it doesn't have authority, but it does have weight. It enjoys a high level of respect because, in particular, as we get away from the founding of the republic and we get into more modern times, we do live in what is called an administrative state. And the administrators, the executive branch, they're the actual experts. We're the citizen legislature. I said, my main qualification for office is my ability to eat three church Sundays one day. But we hire them because presumably they have expertise. Then the question comes, well, why don't we just let them write the law? And the answer is, old man. The reason is because no one elected them. Okay, they do not have the consent of the governor. But we do take them seriously, and we ought to take them seriously. So I think in this case, I think the governor was wrong in this veto on a variety of reasons. But I think the question of the legitimacy of his offering, the objections he offered, I think they're legitimate objections.
Correct. Well, and I think, so that some of us are coming to different conclusions is fine and healthy. But the thing I just want to understand is sort of the legal lay of the land with this assertion. I'd like to know how it sort of lands in our process. And we're having administration talk to us about this ASAP so that we can, my father used to say good idea can come from anywhere. So I'm very interested in having the assistance of the administration in developing some answer to meeting the requirements of the law, which is we must reduce emissions. I think we'll be doing our level best, plot a pathway, and imagining that they're trying to figure out the very same challenge. So we'll learn as we go. I still find it odd to be told how our process should unfold, that it comes back to the General Assembly in bill form. That seems rather prescriptive, or entirely prescriptive. When we pass a law that invokes rulemaking, we mean it in the first instance, and then the rule making includes development of things like costs and financial impacts because the EPA requires it. So I find it odd to be prescribed that it has to come back to us in bill form when our current law already provides for just the kind of analysis that is requested. And so just to jump ahead, in the Clean Heat Act, to allow us to operate under our own procedures using the EPA and doing rulemaking, it requires, the Affordable Heat Act requires that the order or rule be presented to us on January 1st, 2025, the legislature. They can't submit the rule. We have a pause button on that process, and it can't be submitted to the Secretary of State to continue the rulemaking, the APA process until June 1st. So that provides an entire legislative session to examine the rule, including its economic impact analysis, and provides an entire legislative session for the General Assembly to reach in, I'd say surgically through statute, to make any kind of adjustments should we see something that could be improved, including addressing costs that we didn't anticipate, something like that.
So, yeah, has the governor submitted a plan on how to deal with it? What's the problem we're looking at here?
That's part of their testimony. That's the middle hour tomorrow.
Yeah, so when he shares his plan, we'll take a look at the merits of both plans and ask ourselves some questions. In the meantime, it's just where we're at.
So I'm not super clear on what that language means there in that last paragraph that's shown up there.
Clearly.
Yeah, I clearly respectfully ask the legislature to include language that would require the policy and cost to come back to the General Assembly in bill form. So is that the, like, the check back that folks have talked about, or is that something else?
I guess that's,
Referred to as a check back.
That's the check back, so,
unless I'm wrong, isn't that what?
but I had thought that,
So I would just parse it as, I think the administration was arguing that the clean heat standard bill should be the first bill and that a second bill should be fully enacted to actually establish the clean heat standard. And that is highly unusual to pass a bill twice. So the language that was worked on with this committee and Senate Appropriations was the check back, which was sort of our drafting attempt to modify that in, it had the PUC developing rules, but having those rules submitted to the legislature with a provision in law that would have needed to be repealed in order for the program to start. So there would have needed to be a legislative action through a bill to repeal this. There was a section of law in H 715 that said you can't move forward with the program until this is repealed. So that was sort of the drafting compromise we came up with, which was instead of passing a full set of bills, again, outlining all the rules, but having a review of the policy in the committee and then enacting a repeal, endorsing the rules. Which again, I still think would have been highly unusual. I did just want to add that rulemaking itself does contain a legislative review of rules. It's what LCAR does. The Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules reviews agency rules that are drafted before they can go into effect to determine whether or not the agency has followed legislative intent, done environmental and fiscal analysis, and whether or not they've acted arbitrarily and capriciously. I think I'm missing one of the things that you also review, but there's a list of things that LCAR reviews before the rules can go into effect to check back to make sure the agency has done what they've been directed to do.
and so it's not necessarily normal for the rules to be pre-baked into the bill, upon its passage, right?
That's correct.
Okay. No, that's it.
Thank you, Chairman Gray. Is there a way that the bill could have been drafted that would have met the request of the governor? Because my understanding is that this is a program we are developing, and there is no way that we could actually meet what I believe to be the standard that is being requested in this veto letter. And I'm wondering if you, on reflection, see that that's the case, or if you could have a chance to do it again, is there a fiscal analysis that we could be doing that could answer these questions?
So I don't think that question is for me. I only do what you all tell me to do.
Okay.
I can advise you on the legal implications, what is unusual, what is unconstitutional, and how those elements play when you draft something.
Yes.
I do think I worked closely with this committee and Senate Appropriations to address the governor's concerns. The governor's request for doing a full bill a second time was highly unusual. Do I think it could have played out in different ways? Potentially, but I do think there was compromise to reach the bill that was passed.
I guess my question is more specifically, when we are creating a program like this, the request for this, there's certain fiscal analysis requests that are made in this veto letter, and they seem like a impossibility because we can't predict the future on what this program will look like while also asking a different organization to develop the policy. So what confuses me is it seems like a fallacy. He's asking us to do a fiscal analysis that is impossible based on the structure of the program. So I'm wondering if that aligns with your understanding.
So I
And
would,
again,
right, well, so I think there's a couple of things, developing, so it is your job as a legislature to develop the policy. Delegating authority to an agency to draft rules does have a constitutional limitation on it. You cannot provide an agency with blanket authority to adopt policy. That would be a usurpation of your authority. And so, as we draft bills that give agencies authority to adopt details of programs that you have adopted, there are standards, there has to be sufficient detail and clarity in the legislation to guide the PUC, and I'm not seeing here specifically, I mean, he does say absolutely no details, but I'm not seeing an allegation that there was not insufficient details to guide the PUC to do their work.
Yes.
Which I know doesn't answer your question directly, but I do think that is part of it. As we draft and review legislation, we do sort of look to see if you, the legislature, are delegating enough authority and clarity of detail to an administrative agency. And I do think in passing that bill, there was sufficient clarity of detail that the PUC had to guide them in adopting a program.
Thank you. Thank you for answering within your scope and also providing me with good information.
The agency is to fill in the details, is to paint the picture with a sharper brush. But they're not supposed to legislate.
Senator
That's what they don't do.
Senator McDonald?
I'm sure the public listening into this is asking themselves, how are we gonna make, help Vermonters keep their houses warm, without using as much of the world's resources and that, without using as much of their money. So that's our job. I look forward to the governor's presentation on how he would meet this challenge. And I think we have some witnesses that will represent the governor on how the governor would meet this challenge. And our job is to try and meet this challenge with another bill.
I do think though, however
We didn't
wrong,
win the Super Bowl last year. We have to try and win it this year.
however wrong one might think the governor is, he is the governor, so if he raises an objection, that objection warrants an answer.
That's our system. Our system is if you fail, you try again.
Well, I'm saying is, I don't think we're being overly tedious or avoiding the actual issue of energy conservation and affordable energy by responding on the merits to the governor's veto letter.
The governor, bless his heart, says he agrees with the goals that are in statute. And he's gonna have a plan to meet those goals. And we're gonna have a plan to meet those goals. And we've got some witnesses to help us meet those goals. So
Just to be clear, when I say the governor deserves an answer to the objections he raised, my answer is that he's wrong.
we disagree with that, but he disagrees with us. So we have to work this out.
All right, great. I don't want to stop prematurely. We're going into a break time, but we've scheduled a whole half hour. There's a little more of a letter. Maybe we should just.
Sure, can I just quickly flag that I do think I misspoke and he has to affirmatively veto something, and if he doesn't sign it, then it becomes a law without his signature. Sorry, I do think I misstated that before. Okay, so the last paragraph says that a bill shall, what the legislature passed included some policy with absolutely no detail on costs and impacts, and a lot of authority and policymaking delegated to the PUC, an unelected board. Regardless of latest talking points, the bill does not guarantee full legislative deliberation on policy, plan, and fiscal implications. The inadequate check back allows legislators to sign off on the policy concept and not the decision to raise costs on Vermonters.
Well, so I would push back on that, not own the decision to raise costs of Vermonters. For one, he's predicting raised costs without having any kind of financial analysis of the administration's own analysis. So I'm not sure if they have an analysis that already looked ahead at this program and costed it out. It'd be great if they would share that with us, because he seems to know the administration seems to know something that we don't, as implied. The other thing is, I think every single bill we pass, we quote unquote own, and that's part of the beauty of the legislature. Like, so, even though we might ask an agency to help us implement rulemaking, there's also an odd thing in here which I want to note in passing. It seems to imply that delegating tasks to the Public Utility Commission, and then noting that they're an unelected board, is objectionable in some way. The Public Utility Commission, or the PSB, has been around since I think various versions of it since 1858 or 55, when it was a railroad commission. It's always been an unelected board. It does turn out that the members of it are appointed by the governor, so I would think that any governor might feel some comfort in knowing that the appointees that he or she put into the position, especially at this point, 6 years into administration, where there's been complete turnover on that board in terms of appointments or reappointments. So,
That's the same unelected board that ruled fairly recently that Global Foundries could be a utility under the law. They did.
Yep.
The governor could ask us to rewrite the law to prohibit that if he wanted to. Or we could, pass a bill to prohibit their unelected ruling. But that's neither here nor there. What's the governor's plan to deal with how we heat our homes, businesses, and state? And I look forward to taking a look at it.
great. Ms. Chakowski, anything you wanted to comment on in that last paragraph?
I was just gonna comment on his reference to the latest talking
Yes.
points. So his reference to the latest talking points and the inadequate check back was the governor raised a concern. The legislature in the Senate Appropriations Committee drafted an entirely new section with checkbacks to address his concerns. So it did feel to me odd to say that the response to his concerns were talking points when they were actions to negotiate and compromise with him. But just to go into a little bit of detail on what that entailed, it required, I think, 3 sets of reports back from the PUC before the rules were published, well before they ever became final, as well as requiring them to be submitted to the full General Assembly. And the bill amended part of the APA to specifically craft this different sort of track that the rules would take to go before the full General Assembly for review, and have a bill passed requiring the repeal of one of the statutes in order for them to move forward. And this was significantly different than the standard LCAR process, which would have required a specific committee of legislators to look at a rule. So I just want to highlight that there were changes made known as the checkback provisions that were requiring full legislative review of the rules, which is highly unusual in of itself.
Senator Watson?
Simple question, I'm not familiar with the APA.
The Administrative Procedures Act is the set of statutes in Title III that govern administrative rule adoption. So when the legislature delegates authority to an administrative agency to adopt rules, they have to follow the procedures in that set of statutes.
And it's like section 840.
3 VSA Chapter 25. And there are a number of statutes in the 800s, yes, the 800s, but it's a number of statutes that govern that process.
So I just to make sure that it's entirely explicit, does, since you had drafted the initial version of the Affordable Heat Act, from the point of view of the legislature maintaining its obligation to be the lawmaking body unless it delegates with adequate direction, does the current draft of the Affordable Heat Act delegate with adequate direction from your point of view as a legal analyst for the committee.
Yes.
Okay.
S5 is fairly different than H715, so I don't want to do direct comparison, but yes.
And then I think for people, before we, last quick comment for me before we take a break is, or we can keep talking if other people want to say stuff, just that these concerns around costs have been further developed in terms of affordability is a major theme and part of the lens through which the rewrite of that law happened to make sure that the program is affordable for low and moderate income Vermonters. So,
Is affordability defined in statute anymore?
I don't believe so.
So
No.
it's not a, it's a concept, but it's not a legal. It's like,
No, can I just couch my response to your last question in lawyer speak in that I do find it highly likely that the current version of S5 would meet the constitutional requirements. Do I think other attorneys could argue otherwise? Potentially. That's what lawyers do.
That's what
But
lawyers do.
in drafting, I always have an eye on making legislation as constitutional as possible.
Okay.
always grateful when you point out that there may be, or is not a conflict. in the Constitution.
Great, thank you very much. So we have a break till 10.